Dr. LaRue is not here today, but hopefully she'll join us next time. But I thought since you were with Violet in South Africa, you could give a little context that now we get to hear from Nanette, who's doing this great research with someone really adorable next to you, by the way. But since you were there, Peter, I thought it would be so nice to hear about the context and just a little bit about your experience going.
Well, thank you for inviting me to do that, Karen. Yeah, so actually, I'm just going to hold up my book, Window Frames, which I wrote in 2006. And in chapter 11 of that book, I wrote the following paragraph, if I can find it here. In March 2000, I accompanied Violet during her 3 South African trainings in Pretoria, Bloemfontein, and Cape Town. I traveled with Violet as an assistant in the trainings, but also as a researcher interested in exploring the cross-cultural relevance of her work. Essentially, my question was the same as it had been at the outset of my dissertation studies. I was curious to know what it was about Violet's work that appealed to practitioners in so many diverse cultural settings around the globe. And what I think is really amazing, this was 22 years ago, is that that question is still so relevant even this morning with so many countries and languages and cultures represented on these wonderful Just for Now meetings. So I'm really excited to hear about the work, the research work that's going on in South Africa. Liana and I have actually talked about, I know she's not able to be here today, but we've actually been in communication about writing a follow-up book, having people voicing from different cultures the answer to that question, which is why is it still so relevant in so many different places? So that may still come to be, but I'm really excited to hear from our folks out there who are presently doing research in so many different settings. So thanks for letting me make that brief introduction, Karen.
Thanks for being here. And all your work. And those of us who do training know that when people introduce themselves and why they're interested in getting training in the Oaklander model, the sort of joke, the fun moment is when someone refers to it as their Bible. And so what I say as someone who trains in this model is that Peter's book, Window Frames, is the Bible for me in doing these trainings. So, you know, it's very appreciated how thoroughly you documented not just what's valuable about Violet's work, but what's valuable about her training. And that is relevant even now with so many people wanting training in her model these days. So nice to see you.
Thanks,
okay, Nanette.
Good day, everyone. It's a wonderful privilege to be able to present here and to talk to you and to meet everyone. And this is my boy, Sia, CJ. So hello, fellow.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for being here with your mom.
Sorry, it's way past his bedtime, but he's never been a good sleeper, and today is no exception. So sorry about that. And he's feeling very insecure with things not being the same as always, with me not putting him into bed. So sorry for that.
This is a group where that's no problem.
So, okay. My husband is here, but he's also having his hands full with a baby. So sorry about
we appreciate that you are doing this at such a time in your household. Like, that's a lot for me to ask for someone to present during bedtime with 2 young kids. So it's our gratitude to you, truly.
No, not at all. No, it's my privilege. It's also a silly time to try and do a PhD But that's just the way it is. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. So for those of you who haven't heard my name, I'm Nanet van der Burgh, and I live in Pretoria in South Africa. So one of the places that you have been, Peter. And by the way, Peter, I've read your book and found it so useful during my studies in my master's. So thank you for going through that effort. It was valuable. Yeah, so as you see, I'm living with my husband and 2 boys, and that's primarily what I'm doing now is I'm raising kids, but I'm also trying to complete my PhD. So just a little bit of background in terms of how I came upon my topic and why I'm doing what I'm doing now. In 2012, I commenced with my master's in social work, specializing in play-based interventions. And during that time, I was introduced to and trained in Gestalt play therapy by Dr. Liana Leroux, whom you would have met tonight, but she's unfortunately not well. So she would join the next time. But I was very fortunate to be under her guidance because she's a fantastic leader and she's passionate about Gestalt play therapy, despite it not being a very common therapeutic approach in South Africa, or not well known. But I was immediately hooked, and I also realized how Gestalt play therapy fits like a glove in terms of many of the suggestions for intervention with severely traumatized children. And I'm talking specifically about the neurobiological suggestions regarding work with trauma. So many of you who work with severely traumatized children might be familiar more than I am in terms of the findings and the suggestions in that regard. But just a few things that I can mention briefly about what hit me so hard and about the relevance of Gestalt play therapy was how it addressed the limitations of conventional therapies. So in my readings and research, I realized that it centers the limitations of conventional therapies, centers on 3 core aspects to me, which was firstly, the fact that it's often experienced as re-traumatizing for children. And secondly, it often fails to access the parts of the brain that has been affected by trauma. So not to focus only on the verbal account of what happened to the child, but the physical nuances attached to that experience. And then thirdly, it's also, the fact that it's really, it relies on cognition and rational thinking and logic. And the suggestion in terms of working with severely traumatized children from a neurobiological lens, I could say is almost, contradicts all of those aspects. So it first of all prioritizes safety in a relationship, or safety in a therapeutic setting, but also for that person to really be engaged in a developmentally appropriate way, in a playful way, that fosters a sense of mastery and control, and that uses creativity. And then in terms of addressing the parts of the brain that has been altered by trauma, it suggested that it's really necessary to access those parts in therapy, and to cause experiences that are countering those unsafe experiences and the trauma that it caused. And then thirdly, to go about in a non-verbal way, not only because of the fact that the cortical area of the brain is being bypassed when a child is threatened, but also because children are not primarily inclined to use language as a way to work through trauma, and rather engages in playful ways or in creative ways. So to me, Gestalt play therapy seemed to fit like a glove, since it in the first place prioritizes relationship before you go into anything else, to go through the stages of the process to first of all ensure that a child has, the safety in the relationship, but also this strong sense of self to deal with going through the trauma memory and to address that. Also, the way it uses playfulness and humor, and it has strong boundaries in place in the therapeutic setting, and all of that, it kind of helps that it's not as traumatizing, potentially traumatizing, as many conventional therapies might be. I think many of the conventional therapies also focus a lot on assessment during, in the very beginning, before there's any relationship and before there's a sense of self and emotional awareness, and all the pre-phases before you get to expression. So yes, that was one of the things that ticked the mark. And then secondly, also obviously to access the areas in the brain, the lower areas. So with bodily awareness and the activities in terms of muscle relaxation exercises, the routine that's present in every session and throughout the whole process. And then finally, also obviously the fact that it's not reliant on verbal accounts only of what happened to the child and working through the trauma. So, realizing the absolute magnificence of Gestalt play therapy, I conducted therapeutic processes with children in children's homes, and I measured the effect of Gestalt play therapy over time. And by the way, it was significant what improvement there was, both from a quantitative perspective and a qualitative perspective. So the children gave feedback that was so valuable. But in the end, I realized, my therapeutic engagement is limited in time and in capacity. And if I can empower the caregivers, specifically in child and youth care centers where severely traumatized children live, I can just, strengthen that positive effect so much more. So that is where my interest started to empower the caregivers. So currently I am doing my PhD where I'm trying to develop a trauma-informed care program for caregivers in child and youth care centers, specifically in the South African context. So for the first phase of the study, I conducted 50 interviews with children and caregivers and social workers in child and youth care centers. And just to get a real feel of what is happening day to day, what are the challenges, what are the needs. And it was to a great extent what I expected, but there was also quite a few surprises, as you can imagine. And based on the analysis of the data, it seems that caregivers, they really lack the relevant knowledge and training to work with severely traumatized children. I'm not sure what the case is in other countries, but in South Africa, caregivers are not required to have any formal training. And they often have not completed their high school, so they have not matriculated. And they are often in that position because of difficult situations in their own lives. So it's kind of a last resort for themselves as well as for the children. And that's not often a very, very helpful situation, as it triggers the children's circumstances and their stories triggers something in the caregivers. So it's really a difficult situation of not having the knowledge or the training, but also not being prepared in a way emotionally. So a lot of them experience burnout, and along with that, a lack of support. There's no systems in place to really support the caregivers. I mean, they have supervisors or they have a social worker at the child and youth care center, but it's often more used for disciplinary systems than for support systems. So there's a lot of challenges in that sense. They obviously have great difficulty to deal with the children's behavior, the presenting behavior, and to discipline them in an appropriate way. And they overall indicated that they experienced difficulty having a good relationship with the children, building an attachment with the children, often also because of their own background. They often experience developmentally specific challenges with the children, so they're not equipped to deal with the typical problems that teenagers experience, as well as at the same time, children that's now in toddler years. So, yeah, and then I think the most pressing need and challenge that was present in the from the children's perspective, as well as the caregivers, as well as the social workers, was the fact that they struggled to have understanding or to show the understanding for the children's trauma background. They don't have the awareness of what happens as a result of trauma. So they see the children as naughty and difficult, but not as traumatized. Yeah, and then one of the more practical issues is the fact that they lack resources. And one of those resources is definitely time. So my current process is therefore to develop a program based on these needs and challenges that I've identified. But it's quite a hard process. Along with, being relevant to the fields, to the grassroots level problems, I'm also trying to incorporate the suggestions on the neurobiology of trauma, and also Gestalt principles, as I feel like the Gestalt play therapy principles are so helpful in any context. You don't have to be a therapist, and you don't have to be in a therapeutic relationship to find that relevant and helpful. So, for example, conveying an awareness of trauma and how it impacts the children they serve, but also how it impacts themselves, in terms of secondary trauma and burnout, could already improve the context functions of the caregivers, and therefore have a positive relationship implication. And in the same way, building a sense of self is going, and gaining experiences of mastery and control for the caregivers themselves would in turn have a positive effect, or the same effect, for the children. And the same goes for emotional awareness and self-nurturing. If I can go about to instill that principles in the caregivers themselves, but also in the way they engage with the children they care for, I hope that it can have a positive effect in the relationships and the way they engage with the children. So I have great aspirations for this program, and in terms of to be a means to empower caregivers, and in the end have a positive effect on the target population, which is the children. And maybe it can be even adapted for regular use with for training parents whose children has gone through traumatic experiences, like now in COVID. And also teachers is having a difficult time to get the children to regulate. It's all over the place now. However, for now, I have to be very focused and limit my attempts to only complete my PhD, which is difficult enough. And I have plenty of limitations. So some of it is the time frame. I have very limited time to still complete my PhD. And the second thing is also the caregivers and their context, especially now in COVID. Oftentimes the schools close because of children or teachers testing positive. Then those caregivers have not a moment for themselves, not in the morning, not in the afternoon, not at night. So they don't really have time for training. They cannot get time off to attend a workshop elsewhere. Even if we were allowed now to have great gatherings and I could do it in person, they don't have you know, the time to do that. They don't have the resources to find relief workers for things like that. It's only for really urgent, you know, arrangements, if I can say that. And also another challenge is the fact that many of the caregivers in South Africa are 50 or 60 years and older. So the technology, you know, that I use can't be of a nature that's too challenging. Not that age is the only the only issue. You know, I'm supposed to be technologically advanced in my generation, but I'm not at all. So I'm not only saying it's an age issue, but also the fact that they don't have the newest phones often, and also they don't have the education, and even some of them won't be able to read, you know, English language. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges, and but I'm pressing forward towards this goal. And yeah, I'm just happy to be connected to a larger audience of people who use Gestalt play therapy, or at least some of the principles. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And I would like to reach out and ask if there's anybody who have any experience in this regard, you know, even if it's just a portion of it, in the sense of work in child and youth care centers, or training parents. I've had the privilege of meeting with Seema Omar, and she, yeah, it's already such valuable information that she gave me and assistance. But yeah, it would be so great if anybody could reach out and we could just have a conversation. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Karen.